I got to tell you, just real quick, I'll start with this and then we'll move on. I was having breakfast a while back with Brian Hansen. So big, tall Brian, he's back over there. And it happened to be his kids were off school for that day, so he brought his kids to breakfast. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. And we're sitting there, and Henry, who's third grade, Henry is like, hey, I got a question for you. Why don't we know who wrote the book of Hebrews? And I'm like, you're third grade. Why are you asking that? And he's right. We don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. It doesn't say who signed it. Well, Brian, his dad, was like, oh, we know it was Paul. Now, their third grader, Henry, responded like, well, wait a second. Paul actually signed all of his other letters, but nobody signed the book of Hebrews. And I'm like, Henry, what is happening? This is like seminary level stuff. How do you know? I asked him, how do you know this? And he goes, oh, Wednesday night class. Wednesday night class. If you're not bringing your kids to Wednesday night class, you are missing out, okay? Kareen is also the teacher, but that is phenomenal stuff. That is so impressive. And I think we've got these resources. I think you should take full advantage of them. Okay. We are starting a brand new series. The series is called Bent, Not Broken, which I think gives you an indication of where we're headed. But I wanted to read you this section of Scripture Paul wrote. It was one of his letters that he did sign in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. I just want you to tune in to what Paul is communicating here, okay? So there's a little bit, it's about 5 or 6 verses. So just listen for what Paul is saying. It's not going to be hard to hear. Listen for what he's saying. He starts off, I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1, which was this little thing that they did. It was a little loophole because you weren't supposed to beat someone too severely. So they decided too severely was 40 lashes, but they could beat a person 39 times. And so Paul, this happened to him frequently, 3 times. He goes, 5 times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones, and they tried to kill him with stones. 3 times, I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country. It sounds like a terrible Dr. Seuss book, doesn't it? In danger at sea, in danger from false believers. I have labored, I have toiled, I have gone without sleep. Oh, that's the worst. I have been known hunger and thirst. I've often gone without food. I've been cold and naked. And then he says, besides everything else, I face daily my concern or my anxiety, my worry for all the churches. He's planted all these churches all over the Mediterranean, and he's worried about him. It does sound a little like Paul is playing that, oh, you think you had a bad day game? You know what I mean? Like somebody came up to him like, Paul, man, I just didn't sleep super well last night. I only got 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And Paul's like, oh, you think you had it bad? I've been beaten. I've been nearly drowned. I've been shipwrecked. That's not actually what he's doing, but there's an important reason he's talking about this. The backstory is super interesting. This is one of those things maybe your kids would learn on Wednesday night if they came. Paul has been killing himself trying to start these little churches all over the Mediterranean basin. He's gone all over, spot to spot to spot. He'll find people that seem interested, and he'll start a church. He's gone to Corinth, which is a town on the Greek peninsula. Iberian Peninsula, is that right? Anyway, he's gone to Corinth, and he started a church there. He was there a year and a half trying to get everything figured out and trying to get everything just so and trying to tell them everything that they needed to tell him, and he's been trying. But it's a little like, and I can imagine this is what it felt like for him, the parents, the first time you left your kids when they were just old enough to be left at home without a babysitter. You remember the first time you did that, and you tried to prepare them for everything that could go wrong? You were like, well, here's, the normal stuff. Here's the fire extinguisher. Make sure you know how to call 911, have a working phone. But then you're like, okay, if the toilet starts leaking, here's how you turn off the water main. And if we discover your brother's allergic to something, here's an EpiPen. Or if we left enough food in the fridge to last the winter just in case. And you're like, Mom, Dad, you're going to be gone for like 2 hours. But you worry. You worry about the worst case scenario. And Paul did that with these churches. He tried to give them everything that they needed to make it. And then he left, and he hears that this church in Corinth has just disintegrated. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And so his only tool that he has is writing letters to try to help them out. And so when we read these letters, we're reading Paul writing to a church that's in an emergency. It's a 911 situation, and he's trying to help them out. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Now, and it's not just that. It's not just that the church is a mess, but in the middle of that mess, false teachers have come in that chaos and that uncertainty. They've come in and they've said, oh, hey, this is an opportunity for us. Now, they couldn't just walk into these churches, and it'd be like here. If somebody showed up here and they were like, oh, yeah, I'm in charge here now, you'd be like, well, who are you? What are you doing? They had to come in and they had to undermine the previous leadership. They would undermine Paul, who had planted this church and spent 18 months of his life trying to get them going. And it was real subtle what they would do. It would be things like, Paul started this church? Oh, Paul, yeah, great, good heart. Man, bless that guy's heart. He just really tries so hard. Yeah, have you ever thought how hard his life is, Paul? Yeah. Oh, you haven't thought about that? Did you know that guy's been in 3 shipwrecks? I wouldn't go sailing with him. Yeah, I've sailed all over, never been in 1 shipwreck, 3 shipwrecks. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Well, I just mean that it makes you wonder that this guy that's supposedly blessed by God has such a hard life. If God is really backing him, why is his life so hard? And you can see how these questions begin to undermine their confidence in who Paul was. And they're saying things like you would think, if God was really on his side, things would be a little bit smoother in his life. I sometimes worry that Paul doesn't teach the whole gospel, and he would say something like, hey, have you guys ever heard of circumcision? That was a big one that they would go around trying to get people to believe in. You can look that up later if you want. Have you ever heard of circumcision? And they would try to introduce these new ideas that weren't core to the gospel by undermining Paul. But the presumption they were making was this, and this is important, is struggle and suffering must mean that God is mad at you or distant from you or doesn't want to have anything to do with you. Struggle and suffering must mean that. And since Paul struggled and suffered, God must not be with him. Let us tell you the quote-unquote real truth. That was the backstory. Now, that's important, but what's important to know about that is that Paul writes about struggle and suffering to help them understand why we struggle and suffer. Not necessarily to say, hey, you guys got to ignore these guys, but it's a misconception about reality and about life. And this is what's good for us. Have you ever thought that? Have you ever thought struggle and suffering must mean that God's somehow upset with you in some way? Yeah, I vividly, it's like our default programming. I can vividly remember times in my life when something went wrong, and I'll be like, what did I do, God? What's wrong? Why are you mad at me? Why did you let this thing happen? And I don't know why we think that way. It just comes sort of hardwired into our religious thinking. But here's what's good for us. In response to that misconception, Paul is going to offer 3 surprising truths about suffering that help us understand the things that are happening in our lives. 3 surprising truths. And here's where he goes in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7, just 4 verses. He says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the all-surpassing power that is in us, it's from God, not from us. He writes this is really poetic and thoughtful. It's worth underlining. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. We are struck down, but we're not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. Very poetic, a little confusing. But you can tell there's something there. There's something profound in what Paul's writing. But to try to really get at the depth of truth, we're going to have to spend a little bit of time. So here are the 3 surprising truths that I think he talks about in this passage. The 3 surprising truths about suffering. Number 1, life is harder than you think. Life is harder than you think. And some of you are like, I'm not surprised about that at all. Why would you say it's surprising? Here's why it's surprising. Because no matter how hard you think life is harder than that. Life is harder than you think. Have you ever heard of Louis Zamperini? Does that name ring a bell? Louis Zamperini? They made a movie about him, so maybe that's the way that you would have been introduced to him. There was a biography written about him called Unbroken, and then they made the movie Unbroken. He had actually been a distance runner in the Olympics. He had kind of had a tough childhood, and he figured out how to sort of take out or find meaning and purpose through running, and he got good enough that he actually qualified for the Olympics, competed in the Olympics. Didn't make it, but after the Olympics, he was enlisted in the war. So he's a World War II vet. And he was part of a search and rescue team, an air search and rescue team, and his flight crashed into the Pacific. Now, for most of us, that going through an airplane crash would have been the hardest thing that we had ever experienced, right? I think that most of us could say, yeah, that would have been like a defining suffering and struggle in our lives. That would have been about the worst. Well, he survived the crash, but most of the crew on the plane did not survive it. And he was in the middle of the Pacific, and he ended up being adrift in a raft for 47 days. No food, no water. 47 days. So he goes from what would have been the hardest thing in his life to this, which now is the hardest thing that anybody has probably ever experienced. So two things. He's rescued from the hardest thing into a worse thing. He's adrift for 47 days. They managed to catch an albatross, he and two other crewmates. One crewmate died during the 47 days. They catch an albatross. They eat part of it. They use part of it as bait for fish. They catch some fish. They manage to survive these 47 days, and they get washed up on an island. Oh, finally, we're saved. We're released. This great. The island happened to be enemy territory, and they were immediately captured and immediately put into one of the most brutal POW prisons in World War II. You go from the hardest thing that's ever happened to you to a harder thing that's ever happened to you to the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. And I think life can be like that. Now, some of you are like, well, this is pretty depressing, Patrick. This doesn't sound like fun. But I think that's kind of the experience for a lot of us of life. We've been through hard things, and then there are more hard things right around the corner. It's a good illustration of life. Not the level of suffering, but the constant recalibration of what is hard. This is not a competition. Someone having one kind of suffering doesn't mean that another kind of suffering is no big deal. But I will give you an example of what I'm talking about that maybe is a little bit more relatable than airplane crashes and POW camps. When you're in your 20s, you tend, you'll have something like, oh man, my back hurts a little bit when you're in your 20s. When you're in your 40s, you'll be like, oh, weird, my back doesn't hurt right now for some reason. That's the recalibration you go through over your life. You're like, oh, my knee is just, man, something feels a little weird. When you're in your 40s, it all hurts all the time. And you get used to it. I'm not saying that being in your 20s is better or worse or not as hard. I'm just saying there's this recalibration of what is hard. Do you remember getting your first part-time job and you get your schedule and maybe you thought, what? I have to work 2 hours consecutively in a row? Isn't there something in the law about this? Are you kidding me? And now you work 2 hours without getting paid for it because you're checking your emails on vacation. It's a recalibration of what is hard and what is tough. And don't get me wrong, there are things about being young that are harder than about being old, by the way. There's a lot of things that are more challenging when you're a kid that do get easier when you get older. But life is constantly recalibrating what is difficult. Let me give you just real quick 4 categories of suffering that feel overwhelming to us. 4 categories. You ready for this? See if you can relate. Number 1, the small thing that happens after the big thing. You know what I'm talking about? You dealt with the big thing. You prayed to God about the big thing. You figured out the budget for the big thing. You worked it out. You figured it all out. You're going to figure out how to deal with the big thing that just happened, the big negative thing. And you're like, okay, I feel good. And then the small thing happens, and you kind of lose it. Like your furnace goes out, and that's a big thing, and you have to recalibrate your budget and figure all that out, and you're like, okay, I think we're going to make it. I don't know. Maybe if we just eat cereal for 3 meals a day for this week, we'll be okay, and you figure it out. You say your affirmations in the mirror or whatever you need to do to get through that, and then a small thing happens. There's this little bill that you forgot about, or this flat tire, just something small, and it just feels like it all unravels. That's a category of suffering that is hard for us to imagine. The second category of suffering is this, the realization that whatever it is forever. Whatever you're dealing with is going to be your life from here on out. When you recognize, oh, I wake up every single day and this is my reality and I have to adjust to that, overwhelming. Third category this is really hard. And this is particularly for somebody who's wired like me. Pretending it's all good when it's not all good. You ever been there? That is such an empty feeling. Being at a party, having to make small talk about the weather when you're just miserable about life. It's so awful. It's a burden. How about this? Being blindsided by relational hurt. That's hard. When you don't expect it, you didn't know it was coming. And here's the last category. I said 4, I should say 5. The last one is thinking faith will fix it. Thinking faith will fix it. I think a lot of us have been there. I did a good thing, God. Why aren't good things happening to me? I prayed for relief, God. Shouldn't I experience relief? I'm trying to get my life together, God. Shouldn't there be some reward? When you expect relief and you find suffering, it's brutal. It's so hard. It's so hard. I want you to get this paradox. This is really interesting because I think we don't think about this very often. But suffering challenges our faith. Have you ever noticed that? Suffering challenges our faith. But your faith will lead to more suffering. That's a tough paradox. Trying to get your life right, trying to do what God is asking you to do is not easy. It's hard. It's a struggle. And so suffering challenges the faith we have in God, but we pursue a relationship with God and it leads to more suffering. It's tough. Look at what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4:8. He says, we are, and I want you to notice the negative words here. We are hard pressed on every side. We are perplexed. We are persecuted. We are struck down. This is great vocabulary, and it doesn't translate as well into English as I wish it would. That hard pressed means we are crushed or squeezed. It means that it's like you're a grape and you're just being squeezed and you're like, I can't take it anymore. That's what that means. The perplexed is like you're in a maze and you cannot figure your way out and you just decide, okay, I'm going to sit here and give up and not do it. That's what perplexed means. Persecuted literally means chased. That's a fun one. Anybody have nightmares where they're being chased? That's a fun one. You're being chased. That's what that means. And Paul's like, literally, I have been chased. His struck down comes from the athletic world, like in boxing, where you take a punch and you're on the mat. That's the language he chooses to describe the experience of his life as a follower of God. It's pretty wild, pretty heavy. I thought this was interesting. I was reading a lot about Louis Zamperini this week, and he wrote his own biography. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But in his biography, he has this quote, and I thought this was so interesting because following all this, he became a Christian later in his life, and he didn't say, oh, being in an airplane accident is hard, being adrift at sea is hard, being at a POW camp is hard. I'm sure those things were, and I'm sure he would say that if he were asked. But he did write in his autobiography, being a Christian is hard. And I thought, wow, that's a recalibration from a guy that has had some hardship. One of the worst things that we can do as Christians is to pretend it's all good. This is one of the worst things that we can do. In fact, just as a fellow parent, if you want to instill deep faith in your children, do not pretend everything's good when it's not good, because they can see right through that. And they will believe that Christianity is hollow if you're pretending to be something that you're actually not. They will see that. And they will say, you know what, that clearly Christianity doesn't have anything to offer because it doesn't provide anything for my mom or my dad because they're just going through the motions. They're pretending it's all okay when it's not. It will kill your faith and the faith of your loved ones. They'll see the reality. I don't think there's any real better way to gut Christianity of its power than to act like everything's fine when it's not. I think it's one of the tremendous lessons we learn from Scripture, particularly the Psalms, which Bruce has been teaching on Sunday mornings, that you don't have to pretend that it's fine with God. But if you try to put on the facade, bad news. It'll it'll damage your relationship with God, but it'll also damage the relationship of the people around you. Life is harder than you think. Oh boy, Patrick, does it get better? No, it does not. The second truth that we learn from this passage is this: suffering doesn't build character. Despite what your dad said. I don't know exactly when it's been, but I took my son and his buddies to Stillwater to go to Nelson's ice cream, where if you get the small, it's like way too much ice cream, but then if you get the big, it's like you'll leave a diabetic there's so much ice cream. It's so intense. And we were looking forward to it. It was one of the first nice days of the year. The place had just opened. We got there, and the line is down the block, and they're like, oh, this line. And I'm like, hey, it'll be okay. It's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it. So we get in line, and we're waiting in line. You remember this, Liam? Okay, well, you will here in a second. We're waiting in line, and the boys are like, oh, this line is so long. It'll be worth it. The ice cream's going to be worth it. We get closer and closer to the front. It'll be worth it, guys. Just hang in there. Just stick with it. You're going to have ice cream coming out your ears. It's going to be wonderful. And stay with me. And then we turn a corner to go to the front door, and on the front door is this big sign that says cash only. Now, I hadn't brought cash. Some of you are thinking, well, there's an ATM inside. I hadn't brought a debit card either. I'd only brought a credit card that didn't have debit capabilities. And we were one person from the front door when you turn that corner and realize we can't get ice cream. Now, it dawned on me first. The boys didn't know what was going on. They're just along for the ride. And I see that sign and I say, hey, guys, I'm so sorry, but we're not going to be able to get ice cream. You would have thought that the world was ending. What did we wait in that line for? This is pointless. Life is pointless. Why is there no meaning? Now, do you remember some of this? Yeah, okay, I wonder. I mean, it was awful. It was awful for them because they had just suffered, expecting something good at the end of that suffering, and there was nothing good. And so I said, hey, guys, here's what you learned. You learned a little bit of character, and that was worth it. No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. They thought it was pointless. We actually went to McDonald's on the way home, and it is not as good as Nelson's, I can tell you that. I think there's a lot of struggle and suffering in life that feels pointless. You don't know why. You're maybe okay with struggle and suffering if you can understand a why, but you don't have a why for some of it. And here's the deal. I know dads love saying, hey, it's good for them. It builds character when kids skin their knees and when they're doing hard chores and falling off your bike when you learn to ride. But the problem is suffering doesn't build character. And I know, I'm so sorry to contradict your dad, but here's the deal. Everyone suffers, but not everyone builds character. Older and wiser isn't true. Often, it's just older. Getting through it does not mean growing from it. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7, he says, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Okay, strange. What's this about, jars of clay? I'm going to give you a quiz that will say a lot about your childhood. We're going to learn about you this morning. What is in these containers right here? What's inside them? Some of you are like, yeah, well, Cool Whip and butter and cottage cheese are in those containers. How many of you are like, there's no guarantee that any of that is in there? There's a real good chance that there's some casserole or hot dish in there. And let me tell you, one of life's great disappointments is going to open up Cool Whip and discovering that it's dinner from like 2 weeks ago that is moldy, right? Now, some of you didn't grow up with this. Some of you are like, well, of course it's butter and of course it's Cool Whip. Well, that's how we know you grew up in a different class than some of the rest of us. I saw this YouTube video this week because I was looking for pictures of these things, just, the right ones, because I know a lot of us had these in our fridges. And the video said, upcycle your disposable containers into sustainable food storage. And I'm like, yeah. Hey, guess what, Mom? We were being sustainable, and we didn't know it. We were saving the environment before it was cool. This passage that I just read, Jars of Clay, if it were being written today, it would be old cottage cheese containers. He says, we have this blessing, we have this power, we have this gospel in old cottage cheese containers to show that the power comes from God and not from us. The Apple famously engineers their packaging to give you an experience. It's as fun, in theory, it's supposed to be, Steve Jobs said it's supposed to be theater, but that's so true. Like if you get a new iPhone, they've engineered the reverse air pressure when you pull that box up and the amount of suction that there is before the bottom falls out. They've thought about that, because they want the packaging to be as good as what's inside. They want the outside to show what's inside. And God says it's actually just the opposite for Christians. What's outside doesn't look like much at all, but what's inside is tremendously good. See, nobody is supposed to look at me and think, wow, I want to be like him. People are supposed to look at me and say, wow, if Jesus can work with him, then he can probably work with me. That's exactly what Paul is saying here. Suffering, this is important. Suffering that points to me misses the point of suffering. Suffering that looks at Patrick and says, oh, look how tough he is, misses the point of suffering. Suffering that points to God and said, look how good God is, that's the point. Look how tough I am. It's no big deal. It'll all work out. Look at what 2 Corinthians 4:8 says. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. We're squeezed, but not crushed. We're perplexed, but we've not given up yet. We've not decided to throw in the towel. We're chased. We're chased, but the word abandoned is interesting too, because it means we're not run away from. Meaning that God is not running away from us when we're feeling chased by life. We're struck down, but the bell hasn't rung yet. And it's not about, oh, Patrick's so tough, he got up off the mat and he took on that challenge. Paul is not, the suffering is not magnifying Paul. Paul's not minimizing the situation, merely a flesh wound. It's not naive optimism. Oh, I'm sure it'll all work out. The not in this passage, it points to God. We're not so tough that we can overcome suffering and that we learn from it. Suffering itself isn't redemptive and it's not transformative unless it recognizes God. It doesn't have to recognize purpose. It just recognizes God. Our weaknesses give God room to work. Yeah, have you ever thought about this? Do you want to know who you really are? Suffering and struggle will tell you. Do you want to be more compassionate to people around you? Suffering and struggling will develop compassion in you. Do you want deeper faith? Suffer and struggle, and you'll discover either collapse or deeper faith. Do you want more wisdom in life? Suffer and struggling can teach you wisdom. Suffering is both the price and place of growth. They made Louis Zamperini's life into a movie, Unbroken. Has anybody seen the movie Unbroken? I haven't actually seen it, but I was doing a little research, and it sounds like the movie ends, correct me if I'm wrong, but the movie ends when he's rescued from the POW camp. Is that correct? He's made it through. He's unbroken. He's resilient. There's a scene in the movie where he's just been beaten by these prison guards, but he overcomes and he stands back up. Look at this guy. He's so amazing. He's so incredible. Movie doesn't tell the whole story. The movie actually tells half the story. He came home from that POW camp a completely broken man. It shouldn't be called unbroken. He was incredibly broken. He was alive, but he was angry. He struggled with alcohol. He abused his wife, and there was this one scene in his own autobiography where he talks about like shaking his daughter because she wouldn't stop crying. I mean, he's very raw in this autobiography. His wife was about to leave him, and then he heard about Jesus. And this didn't magically transform him, but through a process of discovering the person of Jesus, and a Jesus, by the way, who suffers, it transformed his suffering. It wasn't pointless. It wasn't waiting in line at Nelson's and not getting anything at the end. He realized that there was a point and a purpose to his suffering that he could only see in his relationship with Jesus. Jesus transformed his suffering. Third surprising truth. Life can be found in death. And it's not like I don't want you to remember the first two, but if I could really grind into our souls a truth, it would be this one. Because this is the one I think the first two, you're like, yep, life is harder, I can get that. Or, yeah, suffering doesn't necessarily build character, I could get that. But this is the one we struggle to get. We struggle with this so much. Life can be found in death. I've told you this before, use things like this as an illustration, but for about 2 or 3 years, I really got into reading and watching documentaries about mountaineering, about people who scale the tallest mountains in the world. It's super fascinating. One of the best is John Krakauer, who wrote Into Thin Air about a disaster on Mount Everest. Just unbelievable. Really, really cool story. But one of the things that fascinated me when I was learning about these stories, about what people did, there's this truth. It's called the death zone. And if you're above 8,000 meters, which is about 26,000 feet, you are in the death zone because above 8,000 meters, you are literally dying. Below 8,000 meters, and some of you are like, well, we're all dying every day, Patrick. I don't mean like that. I mean like your body, the speed at which your body begins to decay speeds up. You're literally dying above 8,000 meters. Even if you have supplemental oxygen, it only slows it down a little bit. So in other words, I was reading about this week. This is pretty interesting. Every breath you take above 8,000 meters delivers so little oxygen that your cells begin to die. It's not enough. You can live for a while, but you're not living well. Supplemental oxygen only slows it down. Your body enters what's called a catabolic state, which I don't know what that is, but it means it breaks down faster than it can repair itself. Fun, huh? You're like, people pay money to do this? Yeah, they pay good money to do this. So what is happening is you don't actually risk death to summit Mount Everest. You actually die a little bit to summit Mount Everest. You're not putting yourself in danger to get to the top of the mountain. You're actually dying to get to the top of the mountain. Literally. Fun, huh? Paul writes something so odd here that I think our first instinct is just to brush past it. Look at what he says in verse 10. He says, we always carry around in our body the death of Jesus. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus. What is that? Does that mean we wear a cross necklace? Does that, what does it mean? How do you pick up and carry the death of Jesus around in your body? The word is physical body. What? That doesn't make any sense. And he says, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. Now, the translation isn't quite right here, and this is why this is kind of important. It's not really death. The word is necrosis. So there's actually physical conditions that will result in like parts of your flesh dying. The word is literally dying. So what he writes is we always carry around the dying of Jesus in our bodies so that the life of Jesus may be manifest in us. That didn't clear it up, Patrick. That doesn't make any sense. It's such a strange, counterintuitive, complex idea, and I think it's really hard for our culture in particular to get, modern American culture. It is the paradox of Christianity, life through death. It's living communion. The cup and the juice that we take is living it. It's taking in the death of Jesus into our body. Let me give you an example on a small scale that maybe will help. There are many, many, many hard things about parenting. And I don't know if this is the most challenging. It's probably, well, let me just ask this to the parents in the room. What's the most physically, not mentally, physically challenging part of parenting? Real quick, Abigail said, because she has a baby. If you didn't hear her, she said lack of sleep. Right? Now, parents, now that your kids are like teenagers and they're getting, 22 hours of sleep a day, you're like, well, it's no big deal. But when they were little bitty babies and you were so tired, you were so exhausted, and they woke up just to do their thing, and they're like, oh, it's 2 a.m., it's time to play. Dad, you're going to have to get up and play with me, or whatever the particular situation you found yourself. That is hard. The Geneva Convention literally has rules about not denying prisoners of war sleep in order to torture them. But evidently, babies don't listen to the Geneva Convention. It is tough. And so parents, and let's be honest, mostly which parent? Yeah, nobody's surprised about that. Mostly moms. I know some of your dads are like, I do it too. Mostly moms have to die a little bit. You die when you don't get enough sleep. Moms have to die a little bit to bring life to their children. Isn't that true? Absolutely. The Christian life mirrors that concept. If you want to live the way Jesus has modeled for you, if you want to live with the type of wholeness and the type of generosity and the type of forgiveness, you have to step toward dying in order to bring life to the people around you. This is hard. We can't take. The more we take for ourselves, Jesus put it this way. He said, if you really want to find your life, you have to lose it for my sake and for the gospel. You have to be willing to step into things that hurt, that cause suffering, that are a struggle, and that are even potentially dangerous in order to bring life to the people around you. It's like summiting Everest. By the way, Mother's Day is in a couple weeks, so just heads up. Your mom had to stay up for you, by the way. My mom has told me several times that to get me to sleep, she would have to pin me like a wrestler because I wiggled a lot. Can you imagine that? I wiggled a lot. And so to get me to take a nap, she would have to hold all my limbs and pin me down till I was like, okay, I guess you win this one, Lynette, and then I'd fall asleep. Sorry about that, Mom. I actually still move a ton in my sleep. My watch has said, are you exercising right now? Okay. That's true. Louis Zamperini ends his autobiography with these words. It's the end of it. His autobiography is called Devil at My Heels, not called Unbroken, because he deals with the full story. He writes this. He goes, I never thought of myself as a hero, more as a grateful survivor. And he writes this. Think about this in light of what he's experienced. God has been so good to me. You've experienced hardship. Absolutely. 100%. I don't know if you've experienced crashing into the Pacific, surviving for 47 days on a raft with no food and no water, or 2 years in a POW camp, but you've experienced hardship, and to be able to come through that, recognize, understand your suffering in light of who Jesus is, and then to be able to declare, God has been so good to me. Oof, I think we have some things to learn. He goes, it reminds me of the verse, to whom much is given, much is expected. God has given me so much. He expects so much out of me. That's the end of his autobiography. Life will be harder than you think. We are taught in scriptures, life will be harder than you think. And faith is not a free pass, so gird your loins. Suffering doesn't build character, but suffering that reveals God can transform you. And life, real life, is found in being willing to let go of life, giving up ourselves.